Well, in the last video, we just finished the Pentateuch, which are the first 5 books of the Bible. And we learned that the Pentateuch, you can remember the whole idea of all the 5 books. You can sum it up in one word: presence. So with the divine presence, God's presence with us. Of course, we lost that privilege of being in God's presence because we got kicked out of the garden. So the entire book of the Pentateuch is really about getting us back into the garden again, which is a symbol of God's presence, to get us back into God's presence, where we can see God's glory and God's works and His manifestations and His kindness and His steadfast love. Okay, so we figured out how to get in there. So the first 5 books talk about that one promise, and that is the garden. So God goes to Abraham, which is the Abraham promise, which is, I'm going to give you land and you're going to multiply. And that's exactly what describes a garden. So that's the idea of the Pentateuch, that so we figured out how to get in the garden now. And that is, a God that makes promises, that I will be your people, and so that you can be with me. Now we also are going to be like God. In order to be in the garden with God, to remain with God, we too have to be like God. We have to reconcile like God reconciles with us. But most importantly, we have to be able to make a promise, because God is good with promises. We have to be good with promises. And God's promise is that He will be with us, and that our promise is that we will be with God. That's how that makes a lot of sense. So we want to be with God. That means we don't want to turn our back on God and turn toward other gods, which doesn't make sense anyway, because the other gods aren't they don't have personalities, they don't make promises, they're not for you at all. So why would you want to be with other gods? You want to be with God that has a promise of steadfast love. So that's the idea with God. So we're in this, so it's very, very simple. The layout of the first 5 books of the Bible is to get us to be in God's presence. So now we're moving on. We're going to go to the next books, which are the Deuteronomic History. Deuteronomic History is really Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. And these set of books are all about leaders. We talks about in the first book Joshua, because he's a great leader. Then we talk about the judges, and we hear all kinds of stories about the judges who are leaders. And then we get into King David and Saul and all the other kings. And so it's all about leaders. So why the big deal? Why so much emphasis on all of these leaders? Well, the idea is that this is going to be a next promise. God needs to give us another promise. Why? I thought the first one was pretty good. Why do we need another one? Well, the problem is that what we're going to find out is when we go into the promised land that we aren't going to keep up with our promise. We're going to keep turning our back on God. And one of the reasons, so God is going to find a solution to that, which is going to be a second promise to help us out. We need good leadership. So all the books are going to be about good leadership, how we turn back to God with good leaders. So we're going to begin. So we're going to dig in now to the next set of books, which are the historical books. And we start with the book of Joshua. So the beginning of the book of Joshua is really cool. It starts out with right where Deuteronomy, the last book of the Pentateuch, left off. We're at the edge of the Jordan River, and we're about to enter into the promised land. Now remember, the promised land represents the garden. It represents being in God's presence. So we're now going to be stepping in to God's presence. And of course, it's going to be brought about in a very dramatic way. So it's going to be the parting of the water, which is going to be the Jordan River. Now Moses has been leading everybody up to this point until now Joshua is going to take his place. And we're going to notice that Joshua is really another Moses figure. He's going to be just like Moses. Moses talked to God. Joshua talks to God. Moses sent in spies into the promised land. Joshua is going to send in spies to Jericho to check it out. Moses had a feast of the Passover. Joshua is going to have a feast of the Passover. There's a parting of the water. Moses had the parting of the sea, and going to be Joshua is going to part the Jordan River. At the end of Moses' life, he had a great speech. Joshua is going to have a great speech at the end of his life. So you're going to see that there's a lot of connections between Joshua and Moses. So Joshua is a perfect replacement to Moses. He's going to continue the tradition of Moses. And what Joshua is really going to be doing is going to be keeping an eye on the people of God and keep bringing them back to God. Moses had to do the same thing. Remember the people in the desert, they kept turning away from God. We want to go back to Egypt. We don't like it here. And Moses kept turning the people back to God again. Continually, they went and they made a molten calf. And Moses spoke on behalf of the people to God to redeem them. And he told the people to turn back to God. So Moses was really good at getting the people to turn back to God after they disobeyed him. Joshua is going to be the same way. So let's take a look at this grand opening as we walk into the promised land. Joshua sets up, remember in the book of Numbers, we divided up the group into 12, which is going to be the 12 tribes of Israel. So again, Joshua is going to set everything up in 12 tribes. So he gets the first group, which is the first tribe, which is the priestly tribe. And he's going to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, and everybody's going to follow behind. They're going to step into the water, the Jordan River, and then once they step into the Jordan River, God's going to stop the river from flowing so that they have dry land so they can walk across. Now the detail is that it's the rainy season. The rainy season means that the Jordan River is running high and dirty. It's very dangerous. It's a very dangerous river at this time. So you don't want to step into the river, especially the high banks, because you could drop in and really lose your footing, and it would be very dangerous to do that. So I can imagine the priests talking among themselves, didn't you lead the procession the last time? Isn't it your turn? So you're going to have the priests are going to have to be the first ones to enter actually into the water. Now you may think that the priest would say to God, well, stop the flow first, and then I'll be happy to jump into the water. But God doesn't do that. God insists on trust. God insists on listening and heeding to his word. And so that the priests do that. The priests carry the ark, they walk into the water, and then God stops the water. And then the Israelites walk across, and then the other side is the beginning of the promised land. So it's like a grand entry using God's words into to go into the Jordan River. So now they are, and then now they're in the promised land, which represents the garden, which is going to be with delicious foods, and God is going to provide them and be the people of God. So now in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what happens now when they step into the garden, into God's presence. How is God going to now take this land that is occupied by a lot of pagans and now turn it into a rich garden where God is going to now occupy this land. So we'll take a look at that in the next video.